Suffering is a fire. It either purifies or destroys. Take a moment to really think about that. Now, when we talk about suffering, it's tricky because I believe suffering is such a subjective term. What feels like suffering to you might not feel the same for someone else, and vice versa. But here's the thing. Suffering doesn't just show up to ruin your life. It's not like God wants to make you suffer for no reason. No, suffering comes to evolve you, to teach you lessons that help you grow. But when we label these experiences as simply suffering, that's when it becomes a problem. It can destroy us if we get stuck in that mindset. Let me explain. Negative emotions, those feelings we often think of as suffering, yes, they're hard to deal with, but they're also some of the best teachers. They come into your life to show you something deeper, something that's beneath the surface of your consciousness. It's those hidden parts of yourself that need to be healed, and that's why these emotions come up. They're not here to break you. They're here to reveal what needs attention, what needs to be brought into the light so you can heal. So, welcome back to my channel. I'm Arij, a psychologist and life coach, and I'm so glad you're here. For those who are new, my mission is simple: to help you grow, change, and step into the best version of yourself. And if you're serious about leveling up your life, don't forget to check out my Patreon, where I share exclusive content, all my paid courses, and personal coaching. Let's take this journey together. Before we dive any deeper, I want to take a moment to express my gratitude. First, to God for this incredible opportunity, and second, to all of you watching. I appreciate you so much for being here. Now I want you to do something with me. Repeat after me. God's plan is better than mine, and He is helping me every second of the day. Got it? Great. Let's start with that mindset. Now let's dive into what I learned today. During the explorations of the events, it's important to let the patient express themselves in their own words. Think of it like trying to understand someone who's frustrated with their job. You wouldn't jump to conclusions about why they hate it, right? You'd want to hear their personal reasons, their unique frustrations. That's exactly what the psychiatrist is doing, listening for those specific, nuanced details behind the patient's feelings. Sometimes they might hold off on digging too deep into these emotions, especially if the time isn't right. But understanding the patient's thoughts linked to those emotions is key to the whole therapeutic process. Now, reading the patient goes beyond just listening to the words they're saying. Emotions are a big part of the conversation, but the psychiatrist is also picking up on other aspects of the patient's mental functioning, like how they communicate or organize their thoughts. For example, if someone is overly cautious in how they speak, it could be a sign of anxiety or a fear of being judged. These kinds of behavioral cues, combined with emotional responses, give the psychiatrist a fuller picture of what's really going on in the patient's mind. Another crucial part of this process is figuring out how ready the patient is for treatment. If a patient doesn't see the need for therapy, or if they're unsure about whether they even want help, the psychiatrist's job is also to motivate them to engage in the treatment process. Without that motivation, even the most well-conducted interview won't lead anywhere because the patient isn't prepared to move forward. Let's talk about the complexities of the doctor-patient relationship for a moment. This dynamic is filled with unspoken layers. Often, patients want to be open, but also seek the approval of their psychiatrist, and that tension can make them hold back. It's like when you don't tell a friend the whole truth because you don't want to upset them. Similarly, a patient might withhold details about what's really going on because they're afraid of being judged. And this is something a psychiatrist has to be aware of throughout the session. Patients can also bring past experiences into their relationship with the psychiatrist. They might treat the psychiatrist the same way they've treated important people in their lives, like parents. For instance, just like a child might expect criticism from a strict parent, a patient might automatically expect judgment from the psychiatrist, even when there's no actual reason for it. If a patient once felt scrutinized by a controlling teacher, they might respond to the psychiatrist with the same kind of guardedness. These responses are often automatic and conditioned, and the patient might not even realize they're happening. The way patients respond to the psychiatrist's role is interesting too. They might not just see the psychiatrist as a doctor, but more like an authority figure, like a parent or a teacher, someone who holds power. This perception can make the patient feel guarded, or in some cases, they might rely on the psychiatrist as if they're a protector. It's like seeing the psychiatrist as someone who can either judge or save them, which can be similar to how we might view a strict but caring family member. Even the questions the psychiatrist asks can trigger certain responses tied to early experiences. If a patient grew up with a parent who frequently questioned them, they might feel the same kind of pressure when the psychiatrist asks personal questions. So, the psychiatrist has to be mindful of these dynamics because patterns from past relationships often show up during therapy without the patient realizing it. A key part of this work is the psychiatrist's own self-awareness. They have to be conscious of how they, as a person, impact the patient. Every psychiatrist brings their own personality, appearance, and style into the room, and that can affect how the patient responds. For example, a younger psychiatrist might remind a patient of their sibling, which can influence how open or defensive the patient becomes. This process, called transference, plays a huge role in therapy. Patients project feelings onto the psychiatrist based on past relationships, and those projections can shape the therapeutic experience. But here's the thing. Transference works both ways. The psychiatrist also has to be aware of their own biases and tendencies. They need to make sure they're not letting their own interests or habits steer the conversation. Like if a psychiatrist has a strong interest in family dynamics, they might unconsciously direct the patient's responses in that direction, even if it's not the most pressing issue for the patient. Being aware of these influences is essential to making sure the patient's real issues come to the surface. Over time, the way a patient views the psychiatrist often shifts. Early on, the patient might see the psychiatrist as an authority figure or an idealized version of a parent. But as the therapy progresses, this perception changes. For example, a patient who once felt intimidated might come to see the psychiatrist as more of a supportive partner in their healing journey. This change in perception is a big part of the therapeutic process because it reflects the patient's growing ability to trust and form healthier relationships. In the end, the psychiatrist-patient relationship isn't fixed. It evolves as both people gain a clearer understanding of each other. By staying in tune with these changes, the psychiatrist helps guide the patient toward healthier ways of relating to others and processing their emotions. In psychoanalytic theory, we dive deep into how the ID, ego, and superego work together to shape who we are. The ID is where all those primal desires live. The ego plays the mediator between these urges and the reality we face, and the superego acts like a moral compass. These interactions are happening mostly behind the scenes, out of our awareness, which makes them hard to observe directly. When we're trying to understand these dynamics, it's important to remember that much of what goes on in the mind is invisible, especially how the ego defends against the id's impulses. For instance, if someone is repressing a desire, they're not aware of the act of suppression itself. We might notice it later when something that should be there based on their usual patterns is absent. Maybe they don't show emotions we'd expect in certain situations, and that absence gives us a clue that something has been repressed. But the actual process of repression, it's hidden. There are moments, though, when the id's desires manage to sneak past the ego's defenses, especially in neurotic behaviors. It's in these moments that we can see the conflict between what the person wants, the ID, and how they try to manage or block those desires, the ego. It's in this struggle, when someone feels anxious or behaves in contradictory ways, that we get a clearer picture of these inner battles. Think of someone with a deep fear of rejection who still craves close relationships. Their ego might suppress that fear, but it could still surface as an avoidance of intimacy. At the same time, they might develop obsessive habits to control their anxiety about relationships, what we call reaction formation. These defense mechanisms become more visible when they start to crack, and that's when we can see both the repressed impulse and how the person is trying to deal with it. The study of these dynamics has come a long way from the early days of hypnosis. Initially, hypnosis was used to bypass the ego and bring repressed material to the surface, but the role of the ego wasn't really understood. The problem was that even though hypnosis could reveal unconscious material, the ego would just reassert itself later, undoing any progress made in the session. That's why the focus shifted. Modern psychoanalysis aims to work with the ego, helping it manage internal conflicts in a more lasting and effective way. In short, while it's tough to see the ego's defense mechanisms in action, the moments when repressed desires break through give us valuable insights into the unconscious. Understanding the interplay between the I and the ego helps guide therapeutic work, where the goal is to bring these conflicts to light and resolve them in a healthier way. Now let's shift to the concept of System 1 and System 2, which explain how our brains handle different types of thinking. System 1 is fast, automatic, and doesn't take much effort. It's the system we rely on for quick decisions, like recognizing the sound of your phone ringing, answering simple questions like what's 5 plus 5, or reacting quickly to someone calling your name. For example, if you're walking down the street and hear a car horn, you'll instinctively step back without needing to think about it. That's System 1 doing its job. System 2, on the other hand, is slower, more deliberate, and requires effort. This is the system we use when we need to focus or solve more complicated problems. For instance, if you're trying to assemble furniture from a manual, calculate your monthly budget, or compare different insurance plans, you're using System 2. These tasks demand your attention, and if you get distracted, you might not do them as well. To break it down with some everyday examples, System 1 is like making a cup of tea or recognizing your favorite song on the radio. You don't have to think much because your brain does it automatically, relying on past experiences or learned patterns. System 2 is more like trying to parallel park on a busy street or reading the fine print on a contract. You need to concentrate, and if you lose focus, you're likely to mess up. That's why it's hard to do things like solve a puzzle while having a deep conversation. You need your full attention to handle the task at hand. Most of the time, these two systems work together. System 1 takes care of the routine stuff and sends suggestions to System 2. For example, if you see someone in a lab coat with a stethoscope, System 1 might quickly jump to the assumption that they're a doctor based on your previous knowledge. Then, System 2 steps in to evaluate whether that assumption is accurate. A famous experiment called the invisible gorilla really highlights how these systems work. People were asked to watch a video of two teams playing catch and count how many times one team passed the ball. While they were focused on that task, a person in a gorilla suit walked through the scene, but many viewers didn't even notice. Their attention, System 2, was so absorbed by counting the passes that System 1 missed the unexpected gorilla. It shows how we can completely overlook obvious things when we're deeply focused on something else. In summary, System 1 is great for quick, automatic actions that help us get through the day with little effort. System 2 takes over when we need to concentrate, solve problems, or make important decisions. Together, these systems help us navigate the world efficiently, although relying too much on one can sometimes cause us to miss important details or make mistakes. Now, when it comes to trauma recovery, the brain's ability to reorganize and adapt is crucial. This adaptability gives trauma survivors the opportunity to heal, opening up new ways for them to feel more present and regain control over their lives. There are three main therapeutic approaches for trauma recovery. First, top-down approaches involve cognitive and emotional processing, talking, connecting with others, and understanding one's feelings and past experiences. This is about making sense of trauma in a safe, supportive environment by engaging with memories and emotions. Pharmacological and technological interventions are another path. These include medications or other technologies that help regulate the brain's alarm systems, reducing hyperarousal or intrusive responses that are common after trauma. Finally, bottom-up approaches focus on engaging the body to counteract the physical sensations of trauma, like helplessness, rage, and emotional collapse. These might involve physical activities that help reintegrate the body and mind after trauma. There's no one-size-fits-all approach. The right method depends on each person's unique experiences and needs. Often, a combination of these therapies works best for effective trauma recovery. ongoing research is essential to figuring out which treatment modalities work best for different populations. This research explores the various impacts of trauma and what works best for healing, from medications to alternative treatments like yoga, EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, and neurofeedback. Physical experiences that contradict the feelings of helplessness or rage tied to trauma can be powerful for trauma survivors, helping them regain self-mastery and control. This highlights how important embodied healing processes are in trauma recovery. Trauma has the power to disrupt a person's life story, creating breaks or pauses in their narrative. This can leave people feeling stuck in the past or disconnected from the present, which is why therapeutic interventions are so important to help them reframe and process these traumatic events. Trauma can also span across generations, affecting not only those directly involved, but also their families. Unresolved trauma in one generation can show up in the next, influencing behaviors, emotional regulation, and relationships. For survivors, this can result in a disconnect from their loved ones or an inability to feel joy or affection, even in a seemingly successful life. Emotional numbness, a common result of trauma, often requires therapy to restore emotional connection and vitality. All of this underscores the complexity of trauma and the need for multifaceted, individualized treatment approaches that address both the cognitive and physical aspects of healing. And before we close, I want to personally invite you to take your journey even further. If you're feeling ready to dive deeper into these topics and create real, meaningful change in your life, I encourage you to explore my Patreon. There, you'll find exclusive content, in-depth courses, and personalized coaching, all designed to support your personal growth. It's a space where you can connect with like-minded individuals, and together, we can build a community focused on learning, growth, and thriving. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you found some valuable insights to take with you. Remember, every small step you take is still progress, so keep moving forward. I'll see you in the next episode of What I Learned in a Day. And if there's a specific topic you'd like me to cover, feel free to share it in the comments below. Your feedback means the world to me, and I'm here to create content that truly resonates with you. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep shining bright.